Welcome and thanks for joining today's presentation on using stateside LWCF grants to improve outdoor recreation opportunities. My name is Brian Fainer and I'm with the National Park Service and help support our Connected Conservation effort. The Connected Conservation webinar series focuses on how NPS staff and partners can use various tools and strategies to conserve NPS resources at the landscape level. Working with gateway communities outside parks is critical to landscape scale conservation. And as such, our webinar series is exploring the numerous opportunities to partner with communities to further conservation. You can register for future webinars in our series and view past recordings by going to the Network for Landscape Conservation website or our internal NPS Connected Conservation Toolkit, which has just undergone a major update, and I'll soon post links to both of those sites in the chat box. And again, the link to the internal Connected Conservation Toolkit is just for Park Service staff at this time. We will post a recording of today's webinar following the presentation. And throughout the presentation, feel free to plug in questions into the questions box. We'll look at everyone's questions following the presentation. And as a reminder, our webinar series is open to federal and state agencies, NGOs, and other conservation partners, so feel free to invite your colleagues to future webinars. Today we have three excellent presenters with us. Elisabeth Morgan is the Chief of Recreation Grants Program Branch, and this fall marked her 10th anniversary of joining the NPS State and Local Assistance Division, which coordinates the LWCF program. Prior to the NPS, she spent 12 years with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where she was the State Program Officer for the Coastal Zone Management Program and the manager of the Coastal and Estuary Land Conservation Program. Lacy Allison is the Financial Assistance Team Lead for the NPS's State and Local Assistance Division, where she works with internal and external partners to support states and local communities in the acquisition and development of public outdoor parks and recreation areas through LWCF. She has also worked on migratory bird habitat issues at the Fish and Wildlife Service. Emily Ferguson has been the compliance lead for the Park Service's State and Local Assistance Division for the past 5 years. She works with staff and external partners to ensure compliance with federal laws and regulations for LWCF, National Historic Preservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and others. She has also worked for the Environmental Protection Agency on contaminated sites. So, Elisabeth, Lacy, and Emily, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Brian. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Elisabeth, and myself and Emily and Lacy are pleased to talk to you a little bit about the Land and Water Conservation Fund State and Local Assistance Program. So we've got about maybe 25 minutes worth of slides, and we should leave plenty of time for questions at the end. The name is familiar to everyone. The act was originally passed in actually in 1964, and it's been reauthorized a couple of times over its 56-year life. But last year, it was permanently authorized. So as part of the Dingle Conservation and Recreation Act, and so now we are set up sort of permanently. However, our funding is still subject to components. There's what's known as sort of the federal side, and then also the state side of the program, which is where we are. So Land and Water Conservation Fund is where the federal land management agencies, including obviously Park Service and Fish and BLM and Forest Service, get their money for land acquisition. But it's also LWCF is also used for programs like the American Battlefields Protection Program, Forest Legacy, Cooperative Endangered Species. as part of the act, but the second major part besides the federal side is the state side program, which is the outdoor recreation grant. So there's a couple of key provisions about land and water that people should understand. So this is a program that operates in partnership with the states, and every state and territory, including also DC, has a government agency that's charged with the implementation of the LWCF program. Most often, these are located in natural resources or environmental protection agencies. And within that agency, there will be a key official or officials that are designated as the state liaison officer for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. However, the main liaison is often, an agency head and is not necessarily the day-to-day contact for the program. And on our website, we have which we'll share that later, we have a link to each state's LWCF website. We like to talk about there being three main components of the LWCF State Assistance Program, and all of them derive their authority from the LWCF Act itself. And we'll be talking about more about each of them, but they are the statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or SCORP, obviously the grants to states, and through states to local units of government for projects that support the statewide planning requirements, land acquisition to create or expand recreation areas, and also the development of land with facilities to support outdoor recreation. And then the final part is any site that gets assisted by land and water is required to remain in an outdoor recreation use forever, and cannot be converted to non-recreation uses. So we wanted to talk about the statewide planning first, because this is one of the first ways that you might think about engaging with your state partners in the implementation of the LWCF program. SCORPs are required to be prepared or updated at least once every 5 years. They're usually standalone documents, but sometimes they are part of a broader planning document. Participation in the development or update of the SCORP is an important way for partners to get involved with LWCF, and often states will have work groups or steering committees, things like that, that help support this process. The SCORP is required to analyze the existing supply of and the future demand for outdoor recreation as a part of the SCORP. How much land area is dedicated for recreation, how many facilities are available by recreation type, what their condition is, what are the state's demographics, what are participation levels in different kinds of outdoor recreation activities, both currently and what's expected for the future, including for state residents and also visitors. So all those things are included in the state plan. Often there can be geographic specificity to this plan, depending on the natural environment of the state. So like if it's a coastal state or a Great Lakes state, has mountains or things like that, recreation can vary over the geography of the state. So based on all this analysis, the state is supposed to determine what kind of new or expanded recreation facilities are needed. And this is important because these needs are supposed to be a priority for the use of LWCF grants. Besides that, then the plan also includes a program of implementation. And as mentioned, there's a big public participation component in addition to sort of steering committees, work groups, things like that. Most states often conduct surveys, whether by telephone, online, things like that, to assess recreation interest and participation, and public meetings and things. Anyway, so all of those are required elements of the SCORP. Also, as a part of this is the open project selection process. This helps to ensure alignment between projects and the SCORP recommendations. So it's everything from how local governments or other partners can participate in the state LWCF program. Also includes the state's criteria. And usually these are updated, or we recommend that they be updated as part of the SCORP process, so that it reflects the current recreation priorities. So it addresses how the funds will be used, and this can actually vary sort of by state. Some states only keep money for state projects. This is often true when the state has its own state-level funding program for outdoor recreation, but some states pass through all or most of their money. Sometimes there's a combination between state projects and local projects, things like that. So, and finally, it includes the criteria, as I mentioned. So now I'm going to turn it over to, well, almost to Lacy. So just two main programs that the program has currently. So this traditional formula program, and then we also have a newer program, which we're going to get into, the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. And then I also want to mention something called the Urban Park and Recreation Recovery Program. This is not really an active program anymore. The last time it was funded was in 2002. But similar to the LWCF program, its authorizing legislation had a provision that requires that assisted sites remain available for recreation. So as a division, we continue to have compliance responsibilities for UPAR sites, even though we don't give grants for them anymore. Currently, there are two main funding sources for land and water in the state assistance program. The first is the discretionary program, the discretionary funding, and this is the money that's actually appropriated by Congress each year. And our program, over the life of the program, the fortune of the grants, it's really sort of waxed and waned, but right now we are on a significant upswing, and I'll show you that in a moment. Since 2002, the program really hadn't been receiving very much money from land and water at all, but that started changing in fiscal year 2016 and started to increase. And then also the permanent authorization legislation passed last year restored a minimum percentage requirement that was in the original act, but was eliminated in the 1970s. So now mandating that we get, the program get at least 40% of the appropriated funding. A second, much newer source of funding is a program we call GOMESA. So there's the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. And this is oil and gas lease revenues and it is specifically set aside for the state assistance program, and it is not subject to further appropriations by Congress. And this can be up to a maximum of $125 million a year. So, and this was not a lot of money in the beginning, but starting in 2017, a second phase of the program kicked in, and so the funding has increased pretty dramatically since then. So, so just to kind of get at that and give you guys a quick overview, this is kind of overall our funding history for the last 10 years. And as you can see, starting in 2016, our funding doubled. And since then, it has doubled again. And this year, our apportionment certificate is still working its way through the process, but we'll be hopefully in the near future making available up to $127 million and change to our state. And this is quite significant because it's the largest amount of money that the program has received since 1980. So, and it's due in part to just sort of more support from Congress and the change in the act, as I mentioned, but also it's just higher levels of funding that have come in through GOMESA. And in fact, we hit the $125 million cap this year, although it's reflected as $117 million because the GOMESA, unfortunately, is still subject to the sequestration from the Budget Control Act. But anyway, a lot of money out there right now for outdoor projects. So how is this made available? So in the Act, there is a formula. The first 40% of the money is divided equally between the 56 states, DC, and the territories. And then the remaining amount is based on need, which must consider a state or territory's population relative to the national total. At this year's funding level, each state or territory will be getting a minimum of $1.5 million, and the most populous states will get up to several million, and all the way up to California, which will get over 19 million. This division is new. One significant thing in the 2019 reauthorization was it changed how the formula applies to DC and the territories, so that now they each get their own share of the equal apportionment. So previously, they split to one apportionment based on their population. And this year is the first year that they will be seeing substantial new funding levels. By law, states have up to 3 years to get the funds onto grants, so the year in which the money is made available, and plus 2 more. And overall, though, our funding is no year money. So, for example, the money that they'll get this year, they will have until 2022 to actually get committed to a grant.
All right, okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Is it not me yet?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, so this is Lacy, and now we're going to go over the 2 programs that Elisabeth mentioned. We're going to go over them in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to start with the traditional formula program. So as Elisabeth mentioned a little bit earlier, the states, in accord with their OPSP, the states will run competitions for funding. Quite a few states were biennial, but some are switching to annual to try to better manage the funding levels that have increased dramatically. If you are interested, or you know someone who is interested in applying for a grant, first you need to figure out whether your state passes their funding through to other entities, and if so, when they have their competition. In some states, this is on a fixed cycle, and in others, they wait until they have their official notification of funding from the Secretary of the Interior. So some states run really large competitions that are intended to solicit projects for all the federal and state recreation grant programs in that state, and then decide later in that process which source of funding to use. The size of grants really varies by state, so you will need to check with the state, with your state, about available funding. By law, the state is always the primary applicant and recipient for any LWCF grant, but the funds can be passed through to other state agencies, local governments such as cities, counties, special districts like park districts, and also Native American tribes. Only public agencies are eligible to receive grants. However, we do see involvement by private entities such as land trusts or community groups and projects. The LWCF requires cost sharing on all projects, must be 50-50, and grants can be used for acquisition or development of land for recreation or a combination thereof. And only states can get, there's also planning grants, but only states are eligible for those. So there's no funding available for developing local park and recreation master plans, but sometimes site-specific planning can be eligible. And then once the states have received those proposals from local entities, they run through a selection from their OPSP competition, and then the next step is for them to apply for the actual grant from the National Park Service. Okay, so a little bit about what the eligible costs are, or activities rather. And what we like to say often is, if it's outside and you can play on it, LWCF will likely cost share on it. Things like replacing playgrounds to make them accessible or inclusive is very common these days. Facilities for field and court sports such as football, soccer, rugby, baseball, and softball, basketball, tennis, and pickleball are just a few eligible to name there. And also trails for walking, hiking, biking, horseback riding, or cross-country skiing are also eligible. We fund winter sport activity sites as well, such as ice skating or ski areas, and also things like sites for tent or RV camping, pools, dog parks, etc. Park support facilities can also be cost shared on and include things like bathrooms, utilities, lighting, internal road and parking infrastructure. Besides visitor support facilities like bathrooms, we generally don't pay for any kind of indoor facility. For example, things like recreation centers, arenas used for professional or semi-professional teams, more elaborate overnight accommodations such as lodges in parks are not eligible. One exception though is visitor centers or interpretive centers, as long as they are not very elaborate, but costs may also be prorated depending on what will be included in there. Okay, so the matching requirement that I mentioned just a bit ago, as I said, it has to be 50-50, the minimum, and that must be matched with non-federal sources, including state, local, or private, or a combination. There are a few federal sources, however, such as CDBG and RTP, that have authorization to be counted as the non-federal share, and these are allowed to match LWCF grants. But aside from that, and also per the Act, there can be no other federal funds in the project, even if everyone's match requirement is met. And this is something you have to look out for, because some funding that appears to be state funding or even private funding may be getting passed through from another federal agency. So make sure you get to know your funding sources well to ensure they are eligible as match. Okay, and land not already in recreation use or that has already been acquired for recreation can be used as in-kind match. We often see projects where land is donated by a private party, and this is used to match the LWCF funding. And then they use that to develop the recreation facilities. Okay, and now we're going to go into the competitive program, the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, or the ORLP, or ORLP, you'll hear people say too. So congressional direction in 2014 was for the National Park Service to create a new program to assist projects in low-income neighborhoods of densely populated urban areas, specifically that have limited or no recreation opportunity currently. The ORLP program was created, and through a separate appropriation, it funds similar kinds of projects to the formula program. However, unlike the formula projects, ORLP projects must occur in the associated geographic boundary of an urbanized area officially designated by the census. And when you look at the application materials, there are links to that to figure out if the location is eligible. Also, the applicants must represent a jurisdiction of at least 50,000 people. The projects should create brand new park opportunities or substantially rehabilitate an existing park such that the impact is similar to a new park. Projects that will generate economic benefits in addition to recreation benefits, such as through the creation of new jobs, like permanent positions for new staff to manage the park or run programs, or that will help increase foot traffic to nearby businesses such as restaurants, are favored. Okay, as you can see in this chart, funding levels for this program have also increased, similar to the formula grants. And so far, funding cycles have been running about every other year, but we are working towards creating an annual cycle for the ORLP. And hopefully even to increase consistency there, maybe around the same time every year. We're working on that. Okay. So there is an opportunity, a funding announcement that is active right now with proposals due to the National Park Service by July 10th. But it's important to keep in mind that if you're interested in applying, or you would like to forward this information on to somebody who would be interested, that the state deadlines are going to be earlier than that, because they need to go through their OPSP process to determine which ones will be sent up to us. And although states have been increasing their grant ceilings in response to the increased LWCF appropriations, for now, ORLP grant amounts are typically larger than your regular formula grant amounts, except for California. They have larger grants too. And a reminder from a few slides back, this funding source aims to fill a recreation gap in a low income area. So in the proposal, you definitely want to make sure you address that. And then projects with excellent public engagement and clear support through nonprofit and private partnerships will receive higher scores than those that do not make that clear in the proposal. All right, LWCF by the numbers. The LWCF funds have supported outdoor recreation projects through more than 44,000 grants since its beginning in 1965. Since many of them match federal funds above and beyond the required 50-50 match, the overall contributions to park projects is almost $5 billion in federal dollars, with more than $10 billion in private funds. Having some extra leverage to show the degree of partnership in your project will also receive more points in the review process. 76% of grants have been awarded to local governments, and grants have gone to every state and it's impacted nearly 100% of the counties throughout the U.S. Okay, I think on to Emily.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. This is Emily Ferguson. So I'm going to talk about, before we get into the perpetuity piece, I wanted to talk about, we mentioned on slide 2 that there's a federal and state side for the LWCF program, and here we want to be a little bit more specific about the purpose for the LWCF program. This program is about preserving, developing, and assuring accessibility of present and future generations, such quality and quantity of outdoor recreation necessary and desirable for individual active participation to strengthen our health and vitality. In other words, they want to build an outdoor recreation estate. When people think about the state assistance program, they tend to be focused on funding. But together with the federal side and the state side program, it's intended to help assure there's enough land set aside for the United States so that people can get outside to recreate. Okay, so for site protection and maintenance requirements, first we should talk about the fact that assisted sites must remain available to support public outdoor recreation uses. This doesn't mean that they have to be the same recreation type for all time, but they do have to have some sort of recreation use. For instance, if funds were used to assist in the development of tennis courts in 1970, we would understand if the community needs have changed and pickleball courts or the removal of the courts entirely has occurred to put in a multi-use field. So it's active recreation for active recreation. You may have noticed in the slide previously, I said that it was to build an outdoor national recreation estate, but I didn't say it's to build a permanent recreation estate. And here's why. The words for the purpose for present and future generations are reflected in the perpetual protection for grant-assisted areas in the provision of the Act. The conversion provision prohibits grant-assisted areas from being repurposed or converted to non-recreation uses. Threats to parks and public land can be external, road widening, or desire to reuse the parkland for schools, public buildings, fire departments, health departments, housing, or commercial development, or even just an internal purpose. Particularly as parks and recreation agencies have been pushed to be more economical and self-supporting, we see more demand for facilities to support revenue-generating activities like meeting or conference spaces or requests to lease space for cell towers. Sometimes the community itself changes, making the park no longer viable for this area. And when those things happen, that's when a conversion is sort of the path you're on. So a conversion approval is for a full or partial conversion, and it's provided when 3 conditions in the Act have been met. And those conditions are associated with the replacement property, and that means it has to be in accord with the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan that we talked about earlier. It has to be of at least equal fair market value and be of reasonably equivalent recreation usefulness and location. And for a full or partial conversion is the only remedy that's provided in the law. So paying back the grant is not an option. 56 years is a long time. And with turnover among local governments, officials, and residents, they often forget that there has been LWCF funding put at a site. So regular inspections are important, and we ask that they do those every 5 years. And those inspections, we want people to check and see if there's signs there, how the recreation amenities look, and make sure it's open and available to the public. One thing that you guys can do to help us is be our eyes and ears on the ground. Knowing what parks in your community have LWCF restrictions can help stave off interest in repurposing parks for other uses. We usually find out about conversions, but it's often late and not in a good spot. And it's hard to change things when they're already down the road. We hope that we'll have a new database soon and website launched this year to help you with that aspect. That was a lot of stuff. So I wanted to get into the organization now of our program and how we sort of work. So we're under the National Park Service, and we actually fulfill the second part of the mission. And that sentence of the mission, I think everybody is familiar with the unimpaired for future generations. So the second sentence is the National Park Service cooperates with partners to extend the benefits of natural and cultural resources, resource conservation, and outdoor recreation through this country and the world. So organizationally, we are within the Partnership and Civic Engagement Directorate, and we are the Division of State and Local Assistance Programs. Operationally and how we function, I consider us one team and we all support one another. But administratively, we have a team in the DC office that is our lead, and then we have staff sitting in several offices around the country, mostly in Atlanta and Omaha. And the people in the regional offices, we've divided up the United States, and each of those people all have their own state that they work with, either for compliance or for grant assistance. And then our next slide, we've actually just sort of rearranged it so you can see the roles a little bit clearer. So the state, they're in charge of that SCORP that we talked about earlier, and the OPSP, and they evaluate and select projects for us. They prepare and submit applications, and they do those site inspections that I just mentioned every 5 years. The National Park Service, we provide technical assistance and approve that SCORP and OPSP. We give out the annual apportionment, we approve the applications and deobligate funds, and then we monitor and close out completed projects. And then in post-completion, we're looking at what's going on, and we also manage the policy for the program, the manual, as well as the database that's coming. And our shared responsibilities is managing funds and monitoring grant projects, assuring compliance of grants and projects with the LWCF manual and federal grant regulations, and then overseeing post-grant compliance. So things that you guys can do and ways that we engage with to engage with the LWCF stateside. So we talked about the planning for the SCORPs. That's usually a 2-year cycle for SCORPs. So if you look at your state SCORP and you see that it's going to expire in 2023, you might want to start getting to know your state contacts so that you can sort of join their team for that planning, because that's going to start probably at the end of this year for 2 years to get that done. And as you saw previously, there's lots of public engagement associated with that, and it's really important to get your information and wants and priorities get into that document. And then with the grants, you want to figure out who your state lead agency is and become familiar with their grant competition process and when they run their grant rounds, what sort of projects they're looking for, if they have any priorities. Those will be actually listed in the statewide, the SCORP document that we just talked about. And then for preservation, if you become familiar with the LWCF sites in your neighborhood, and you can let the state or us know if you see or hear any conversions. We often hear from the public first when they see something that happens in a park that they're surprised to have happen. They'll reach out and say they used to think that it was covered by LWCF, and we'll check our database and talk to the state, pull our files, and start looking into that sort of matter.
All right, and I'm going to pick up the last part of this right here. In addition to, so as we've sort of explained, the stateside program is obviously fairly externally oriented, but that's not to say that there aren't ways in which we interact with within MPS as well. So hopefully a lot of you listened to Bob and Donnie's presentation a couple weeks ago about the, among other things, the Conservation Outdoor Recreation Program. So the Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program is an area where there's a fair amount of overlap with land and water. So we have many examples of projects where LWCF funding was used to help acquire or develop lands for parks or trails, often pretty frequently, that also sort of were related to RTCA technical assistance grants. So as an example, there's one project, I wasn't able to find an active one, although I'm sure there's one out there, but a typical example would be an RTCA grant that assisted Salt Lake County in Utah and the Jordan River Commission. There was an effort to develop an interpretive trail map for public use of the Jordan River Trail System, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund provided funding for a project to develop 2 trailheads along the Jordan River Parkway. So that kind of integration is not uncommon. And then also, while it's important to note that state grants can't be used to directly assist an MPS unit, there are still ways for LWCF grants to benefit the park units, even if it's a little more slightly indirect. For example, right now, we do have an active grant in Colorado with the town of Estes Park, which was awarded a $400,000 grant in 2018. And the funds will help construct a 1-mile segment of it's part of a phased trail effort, which when it's completed will actually help connect Rocky Mountain National Park to the town, a campground that's associated with the park, and an area trail system. So this kind of thing is allowed. You can go right up to the park boundary, just not into it. So anyway, so that's kind of the overview. And on this slide, I have all of our emails, and then also, as I mentioned earlier, our websites at the bottom there, which you can look to get a little more, a lot of this same information, but also we have a page that links to all the state offices where they are, including a website, web address if they have one. And with that, we're available for questions.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth, Lacy, and Emily. You covered a lot of ground and a lot of great information there. We got a bunch of questions here, so let's jump in. Here's the first one here. Could you go in a little bit more in depth on the available LWCF state and local funding for building trails, and provide any good examples that you can think of?
Sure. So the way it will work within with any given state is that the state itself has to have identified trails as a priority recreation need of the state, which I will say is not unusual in this day and age. I'd say most of the states probably, or a significant number certainly have that. So then, so you would need to apply to that state with your trail project, and LWCF funds could be used to help acquire land to sort of help where the trail would go, or if the land is already available, it could be used to actually develop it. So put in paving, trailheads, educational sign, interpretive signage, all that kind of thing. So it's not just sort of the trail itself, but also kind of the sort of amenities that people might expect to go along a trail.
Great. All right, here's another one. Where are the records showing all the land purchases where LWCF funds were used? We are looking for historic records to determine if lands for proposed development project were purchased through LWCF or not.
Well, at least for the state side, so that, as Emily mentioned, we're working on sort of a new version of the database that will actually have a GIS component, which will be a major upgrade from the system we have now. And we're hoping to get that online this year. The old database, if you were sort of familiar with that, there was a report that used to be posted on our website where you could look up sort of grant records by county. Unfortunately, we're not able to, just because of the technology limitations, we don't have a public-facing website anymore, but that database still exists. So if you have specific questions, you can reach out to us and we can run a report for you for the, by state or by county or whatever you're looking for.
I'll add to that. This is Emily. I think that you can also check with your local state office that's in charge of the LWCF program. They should have copies of all of the grants that that they're in charge of, because they have to go and inspect them every 5 years. In some states, I know like Washington and maybe Oregon have online systems where you can actually search them electronically and see parks that are covered by LWCF or not. And I know other states are working on having those digitally as well.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
and here's a related question. How do folks identify and figure out who the state contact is, in the state government office for to engage on LWCF potential projects for LWCF?
Sure. So as I said, our website is listed here, and we do have a page that has a link or lists all of the states and what the lead agency is, and if there is a website available, we have that shown. But honestly, you can also just Google your state name and LWCF, and it usually will take you right to the page that describes the LWCF program in that state, and most often it actually lists the name of contacts with phone numbers. Sometimes it's one person. Others have things are divided up regionally. So anyway, but that's sort of the main way to get it. Or you can, again, just reach out to us, and we're happy to give you a name directly.
This is somewhat related, I guess. How important are SCORPs in identifying a project that you want to propose or advocate for? Are there ways of receiving LWCF funding if it's not in a SCORP?
So the SCORPs aren't usually so specific that it's not a list of projects. It's really sort of much more about the recreation opportunity and kind of what the needs are. So generally that's at the level of, is the highest priority, or the number one thing we expect people to be doing more of in the future is trails, and do we have enough trails to to meet that demand? And if not, do we need more? Maybe it's good, and there's enough trails in some place but not others, and so therefore there's a geographic emphasis. So the SCORP is usually kind of on that level. It's not so much like, oh, your specific project must get into the SCORP in order to receive funding. It's really about just meeting having a project that meets, in some way, sort of helps meet a need of the state to provide enough recreation for people.
And I'll add to that. Today I was actually reading a SCORP because I'm working on a conversion. So they have general categories or broad pieces like want to conserve open spaces and forested areas for natural setting experiences, or they want to have more close to home recreation opportunities, putting parks in residential areas so that people don't have to go very far to get to a park within their community. And those can be goals that are in a SCORP that your project could meet.
Great. All right, here's another one. Can NGOs apply for LWCF funds? It seems my state says the funds are only available for government agencies. Is that correct?
That is correct. Some states, I'm not sure which state this question comes from, but some states don't pass through the funds through the competitive process. So the NGO would not be eligible to apply in that case. they could be a partner in a project if the state does end up funding local projects, or they could even be a partner in the state project.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the state or local government agencies would need to be the lead applicant, but as we mentioned, sort of for both programs, having participation by nonprofit partners is not uncommon.
Great. All right. State agencies often own lands crossed by national scenic and historic trails, and they serve as management partners for these trails. Can these state agencies use stateside funding to acquire additional lands to protect these trails?
So as long as, so the designation as sort of a national trail is not an issue, but any land that we help acquire, would have to be owned by, by a state or local entity. So it can't be land that would be, then acquired and then deeded over to the Park Service, for example. But sort of cooperating on that level, as long as the land remains in non-federal ownership, that would be okay.
Great. Is there a map that shows the areas with at least 50,000 people for ORLP funding?
Yes, sort of. So we have a couple of links in, I think if you go to our website and then you look for the funding opportunity, or you go to grants.gov and you Google, or you do a search function for LWCF, you'll find an ORLP listing. And that, like we said earlier, there is one open right now. Inside the application instructions and the notice of funding opportunity, you will find links to the list of urbanized areas that are designated, and then also more detail in maps that there are links for that as well. So for example, if you want to do, if your project is going to be in a small town outside of, Chicago or something, the project itself might be in the urbanized area, and therefore it would be eligible by location. But if it's not near an urban population, like it's a more suburban area that's kind of spread out and not, it doesn't really seem clear how people from the more urban areas would access it, then it would just not score as well as a project that makes that connection clear. But yeah, there are maps and lists of cities in the notice of funding opportunity, and you can always reach out to us as well with questions about that.
This is a related question. To meet the 50,000 population requirement, we would have to have a regional planning commission that covers several counties that would apply. Is that okay?
Potentially, but again, it kind of depends on who the applicant would be. So if that applicant is one of those counties, then, and their county doesn't have 50,000 people in it, then likely they wouldn't be eligible. But if the applicant is a jurisdiction that is managing more than 50, an area that has more than 50,000 people, then it could be. But then again, you need to make the case that where the project is located will benefit the people of the more urban area.
Great. Are federal funds available to assist with LWCF site monitoring?
No, unfortunately, the program right now, any kind of sort of administration, including for compliance, is not. That's something that we don't have authorization for in the Act. So it's literally just the actual projects themselves.
Here's another one. Can we have a copy of the PowerPoint being used today? I can provide a quick reminder that, folks, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted hopefully give us a week or so. It will be posted to both the Network for Landscape Conservation website, our internal NPS toolkit, and then we also are building out our YouTube channel, so it'll be available on YouTube as well. But if people want copies of your slides, should they just contact one of you three?
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have a recommended site to identify underserved neighborhoods or gaps where LWCF funds could be helpful?
Not really, because there are so many. But again, you can narrow it down by your state. And then if you know, in general, like where you want to do the work, then you can look it up through the urbanized area map that I mentioned a little while ago, that's in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is in grants.gov. But as far as, something that would just list off all of the, areas where a project could take place, I mean, beyond looking at that specific list of the urbanized areas, not really. We don't really have something that's that specific, because there would just be a lot of them.
We tend to, in our scoring, use the 10-minute walk criteria as sort of as a kind of a distance, and getting to, how would, people in the neighborhoods, or what would be the reach of, that park into the local area based on, how far you would have to walk. So I know Trust for Public Land, for example, does have a tool for, I don't think it covers the whole U.S., but certainly there are a lot of the urban areas, and so you can try that one out. I think people, I have seen in applications that people have used that as a way to kind of demonstrate or substantiate the, the location, the need for that park, and and how it would serve the immediate neighborhood.
Do you know when the letters of apportionment might be sent to the states?
The ever crystal ball. I can say the package is circulating. It has made it up to kind of the upper echelons of the department on its way to the secretary. But as everyone might imagine, the work environment is a little constrained at the moment. But we are keeping an eye on it, and that it is still moving around. And so we are hopeful that that it'll get out in the next few weeks. But obviously the schedule is a little hard to pin down at the moment. But hopefully sooner than the last couple of years.
Great. You all mentioned earlier there's a open opportunity right now for I guess it was for the ORLP.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that posted? Is there a Federal Register notice? Is it in Pepsi? Like where do people go to get that information?
So it's on grants.gov is where where we post all of our announcements, and we also try to do it on our website when we can. But for the state, for the formula funding, it's really the states that drive the competition. So we don't, while we post notices for the formula grants, it's really to just accept the state applications once they're ready. So you would have to. So for those grants, it would really be much more important for you to go to the state's website and figure out when their competition is going to be, advertised and projects will be solicited.
Great. Okay. Last question. If a tribe which fulfills both requirements of being an urban area and has a population of 50,000 owns land outside of the reservation, could they apply for a grant to develop that land?
For ORLP?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Elisabeth, Lacy, and Emily. Awesome presentation, and thanks everyone for all your great questions. Our next webinar in our webinar series is going to be on April 23 at 3 o'clock Eastern time, and we're going to have a couple folks from Boulder, Colorado, actually talking about their open space plan, which a lot of people have probably heard about. Boulder is renowned for its green space. I'm putting a link where you can register for that webinar in the chat box. It looks like the link actually did not come out great. Let me see if I can do that again. But before we close, Elisabeth, Lacy, Emily, any closing words here?
Not really, just thanks for joining today, and feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to anyone to explain our program and hopefully get you money.
Yeah, thank you,
Awesome.
everyone.
And folks, again, there is a link right there again in the chat box where you can register for our next webinar. We have webinars throughout the year, most of the time 2 per month. Everyone is welcome to join. We've got a lot of state partners on the call today, which is fantastic. I hope you all can attend future Connected Conservation webinars. And so thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.